Welcome to The Explainer. In a world that feels like it's just getting more and more chaotic, where do you even start to look for peace? Well, today we're diving into a guide from the past, a set of 19th century ideas that lay out a surprisingly relevant blueprint for navigating turmoil. And it all begins with a pretty bold experiment to build a perfect society.
So let's just jump right in. Picture it. It's 1832, and a group of early Latter-day Saints are trying to figure this exact thing out. They're attempting to build a literal utopia in Missouri, a place they called Zion, meant to be a community of total unity and holiness. But, as you can probably guess, their grand ideals pretty quickly ran into the messy reality of human nature.
At the heart of their whole plan was this really radical idea called consecration. The deal was, members would give all their property to the church. Then, they'd get back what was called a stewardship, just enough to manage for their family's needs. The big goal? To get rid of poverty and create a society of equals. But this whole concept forced one young man to face a choice that would shape his life, a choice that became crystal clear after he attended 2 funerals, back to back.
And these 2 funerals could not have been more different. The first was for a man we'll just call Rich. He was a big-shot corporate president, super influential, very wealthy. His funeral was serious, full of important people, and it was all about his worldly achievements, his resume virtues, you could say. The second funeral was for a man we'll call Faithful. He had a pretty modest career, but his life was absolutely overflowing with family and service. His funeral wasn't somber at all. It was joyful, packed with people of all ages, celebrating what you might call a heavenly resume, a life of character, kindness, and faith.
For that young man, who we now know as Elder Quentin L. Cook, seeing this contrast was a total light bulb moment. He realized that the most important records we keep aren't on paper. They're not our job titles or bank accounts, but the legacy of faith and love we build. The choice wasn't really between good and bad, but between 2 totally different ways of defining a successful life.
Okay, so personal choice is key, but that brings up a whole new problem, doesn't it? Back in Zion, what happens when some really eager members see other people falling short and decide, hey, I'm going to fix this myself? Well, the community was given a very sharp warning, and it came in the form of a powerful metaphor from their scriptures.
They were told flat out, don't steady the ark. Now, this comes from a story in the Old Testament. There's this man Uzzah, and he sees the sacred Ark of the Covenant, this incredibly holy object about to fall off a cart. So he does the logical thing. He reaches out to steady it. But even with good intentions, he was struck dead because he touched it without authority. So this became a shorthand, a warning, trying to fix God's work or correct others when it's not your place, no matter how good your motives are, is spiritually a really bad idea.
As a church leader, David O. Mackay later warned, when people try to steady the ark, they often find their own souls becoming bitter and resentful. The message was crystal clear. You have to trust the process, focus on your own responsibilities, and let God manage His own work.
This sets up a really interesting challenge, right? If we're not supposed to be the rule enforcers, then how in the world do we navigate a community where good and evil, helpful and harmful, often look so similar? Well, another parable, given in that exact same year, 1832, offers a pretty revolutionary answer.
And that answer comes from the parable of the wheat and the tares. So in the story, a farmer plants a field of good wheat. This represents the righteous people. But then, in the middle of the night, an enemy sneaks in and sows tares. Now, tares are this nasty, poisonous weed that when it's young looks almost exactly like wheat. It makes it nearly impossible to tell the good from the bad.
So when the workers see all these weeds popping up, their first instinct is, hey boss, you want us to go rip them all out right now? But the master gives this really surprising command. He says, no, let them grow together. He's worried that if they rush in to destroy the bad stuff, they'll accidentally tear out the good, tender wheat right along with it.
And right here, this is the revolutionary point. This is the game changer. See, the version of this parable in the Bible, in Matthew, says that at the harvest, you gather the tares first to be burned. But this 1832 revelation completely flips that on its head. The new instruction was to first gather the wheat into the barn to keep it safe. That is a massive strategic shift.
This creates a whole new model for how to deal with things. The focus is no longer on aggressively hunting down and rooting out evil. Instead, the priority is on proactively gathering and protecting the good. In a world spinning into chaos, your first job is to create safe havens, places of order and community for the good people. This became the blueprint for surviving not just internal squabbles, but a world that felt like it was falling apart.
And that chaos was definitely coming. On Christmas Day of 1832, a prophecy was recorded. It said that wars would soon begin at the rebellion of South Carolina and would lead to the death and misery of many souls. Fast forward almost 30 years, 1861. The American Civil War kicks off with the firing on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And a Philadelphia newspaper actually reprinted that old prophecy with the headline, "Have we not had a prophet among us?"
The prophecy warned that war would eventually be poured out upon all nations. But even in the absolute darkest of times, this principle of gathering the good created these incredible pockets of peace. Think about this story from World War II. A German Latter-day Saint soldier named Horst Tilbert was a prisoner of war. But his American captors, who shared his faith, invited him to a worship service. And for him, that moment of spiritual gathering, it completely transcended enemy lines. It was a profound moment of brotherhood in the middle of a war.
So in a world that was foretold to be filled with war and turmoil, what was the one single piece of advice given for survival? It wasn't about building a fortress. It wasn't about preparing for a fight. It was something way more personal and way more powerful.
The instruction was simple and direct. Stand ye in holy places, and be not moved. Now that's not a passive command to just hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. It's an active call. It's a call to create and to inhabit spaces, whether they're physical, mental, or spiritual, that are dedicated to peace and to goodness. That's how you build a defense against the chaos of the world. So what are these holy places, really? Well, they're way more than just buildings. Sure, they include temples and churches, but they're also our own homes when we fill them with respect and love. They are the promises and duties we faithfully keep. A holy place can even be our own thoughts, when we keep them righteous, and the words of trusted guides that we choose to follow. Each one becomes its own little sanctuary. But how do you actually find these places? How do you cultivate that inner holiness, especially when the world is just so loud? The answer isn't about looking outward. It's about learning to listen inward for a very specific kind of guidance. The same writings from 1832 describe this guidance not as some loud, booming voice from the heavens. No, it's a still, small voice. It's a quiet feeling, but it's so profound that it can pierce you right to the center. It can make your bones to quake. That is the internal compass that points us toward our holy places, toward peace. And that really leaves us with the final and most important question. Finding peace in a chaotic world, it seems, isn't about trying to change the world. It's about changing our focus. It's about choosing to gather the good, to stand in holy places, and to create enough inner silence to actually hear that quiet, guiding voice. So in a world that is full of shouting, how will you make space to listen?